You already know how to take something apart. You've done it with a pen. Click, spring, ink cartridge rolling toward the heater like it is somewhere better to be. You've done it with a sandwich, peeling the layers to see what is actually in there. You've done it with a rumor in the hallway. Who said it? Who repeated it? Which detail was real and which detail was just noise? That is not being extra. That is how you figure out what a thing is made of. A poem works the same way. It looks simple on the page, a little stack of lines, and then you lean closer and notice the parts. An image that you can almost touch, a line that stops short and makes you wait, a group of lines sitting together like a small room, a voice that may or may not be the writer. Last time, we talked about noticing and about keeping only what still has heat. Today, we look at the bones. Not every tool a poet will ever use, the big ones, the ones you can name before you try them. By the end of this lecture, you'll be able to tell the difference between a general feeling and a specific thing. You'll know what a line can do when it breaks and what it does when it stops. You'll be able to point to a stanza and call it a room. You'll remember that the speaker in a poem is not automatically you, and you'll practice building with those parts instead of hoping a poem just happens. Grab something to write with. We start with your eyes, not with a fancy definition. Before we name the tools, you need a small pile of raw material, not a finished poem, not a masterpiece, just things. Here is your challenge. Think of one ordinary moment from the last day or two. Could be the locker, school bus, kitchen, sidewalk, cafeteria line. It doesn't have to be dramatic. In fact, boring is useful. Now, pause this video. You have about 5 minutes. Write a list, not a paragraph, of 8 to 10 specific things from that moment. I mean things you could point at, a sound, an object, a texture, a bit of weather, something your hands were doing. Don't write, I was tired, it was awkward, and call it done. Those are labels. I want the sticky floor. I want the bent locker latch. I want the wet cuff of sleeve. 8 to 10 items, not complete sentences, but be specific. If you get stuck, start with these ideas. I heard, I saw, I was holding, the air felt, the floor felt, the light felt. When your list is done, press play. We'll use those things later. If your page is still blank, that is your sign to stay paused a little longer. The list is the work. Do it. You can start now. Okay. If your quick write page has actual things on it, a bent latch, a wet sleeve, a tray that rattled, you already started building. You didn't wait for a lightning bolt. You gathered materials. A poem needs that. A building doesn't stand up because someone felt strongly about architecture. It stands because it has a skeleton, beams, joints, a plan. Paint can make it pretty. Welcome mat can make it friendly. Neither one will hold the roof. A poem works the same way. Feelings can start the job. Feelings are not the beams. When the skeleton is missing, you get a paragraph wearing a costume. Short lines, big emotion words. I was sad. It was amazing. The reader nods politely and forgets it before they reach their locker. When the skeleton is there, the poem can stand after you leave the page. The reader can still see the thing you put in their hands. They can still hear the rattle. They can still feel the wet cuff. That's the difference between telling someone you had a day and building a small structure they can walk into. One disappears, the other stays long enough to be looked at. Today, we name 4 beams. Not every tool a poet will ever use, the big ones. Imagery. You attach an idea to a thing a person can sense. Line. You decide where the thought breaks, and that break changes how the poem is heard. Stanza. You group lines into little rooms. Speaker. You choose a voice, and that voice is not automatically you. There are more tools: metaphor, sound, repetition. They matter. They aren't today's whole job. If you try to bolt every gadget onto one draft, you don't get a poem. You get a parade float: loud, crowded, hard to steer. Keep this claim nearby. A poem is built. You can learn the parts. You can practice them one at a time. You already collected things. Next, we make those things do work, because an idea travels farther when it has a body. Here's the sentence I once stuck to the inside of your notebook like a piece of tape: no ideas, button things. That comes from poet William Carlos Williams. He didn't mean ideas are illegal. He meant an idea by itself is hard to hold. Love, fear, this school is a lot. Those words float. A thing doesn't float. A thing has weight. A thing has temperature. A thing can be dropped, lost, borrowed, or stuck in a jacket pocket. If you want a reader to feel something, give them something they can sense. Watch the difference. Thin example. I was nervous in the cafeteria. That's an idea wearing a name tag. It's not wrong. It's just a thin concept. The reader has to invent the room for you. Now try something different. Now try some things. The tray rattled when I picked it up. Someone laughed near the soda machine. My shoes stuck a little on the floor. Nobody wrote the word nervous. The body of the moment did the talking. You can hear the tray. You can feel the floor grab a shoe. That's imagery, not pretty description for extra credit. Imagery is how an idea gets a body. One more ordinary day, because ordinary is where most of your poems will come from. Say the idea is left out. Our thin version: I felt left out in the hallway. Our things version: backpacks already turned toward the stairwell. A joke that started before you arrived. The dent in your locker that never got fixed. Your zipper sounding too loud because nobody was talking to you. Same feeling. Better building materials. The first version reports a verdict. The second version lets a reader stand in the hallway and arrive at the feeling themselves. That's the whole trick, and it's not a small one. This is why poets get picky about nouns and verbs. Nouns are things, and verbs are actions. Nervous is a label. Rattled is a thing happening. Labels are easy. Things take a second look. Glance at your quick write list. Find one item that is actually a thing, not bad day. The thing. If your list is still full of labels, that's still useful. Most first drafts summarize. The craft move is to trade the summary for an object, a sound, or a small action. Here's a mentor example so small you could miss it if you blink. William Carlos Williams, The Red Wheelbarrow. It reads, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. Almost nothing on the page. No caption that says, this matters. He gives you a red wheelbarrow, rainwater making it shine, white chickens beside it. The idea that ordinary things can carry weight lives inside of the objects. If he had written simple stuff is actually very meaningful, the poem would collapse. The things do the work. Linger on the details. Red is not nice. Glazed is not merely wet. You can see the shine, the way rain sits on metal after a storm. Beside the white chickens puts the wheelbarrow in a real place, not in poem land. You could point at it. Specific beats general every time. A warning. Imagery is not a contest for the weirdest comparison. You don't need a locker that is a silver dragon of a destiny. You don't need the dent. You need the dent. You need the tray. If a detail doesn't help a reader stand inside the moment, it's noise wearing a costume. Another warning, stock pictures. Love arrives with a red heart. Hardship arrives with a generic sad face. Those pictures are used up. If you need tired, don't hand me a yawning caption. Hand me the backpack strap digging a groove in your shoulder during last period. Use this test for the rest of the lecture and later when you write on your own. What is the idea? Where does it live in a thing? Can a reader see, hear, or touch that thing? If you can answer number 3, you have imagery. If you can only answer number 1, you have a caption. Keep this beam in your hands. Once you have a thing, you still have to decide how the line holds it. The thing is the material, the line is the cut. You have a thing. Good. Now you have to decide where the line stops. A line in a poem is not just a sentence that got tired and sat down. A line is a unit of meaning. It stands by itself for a second. Then the next line arrives and either confirms what you thought or revises it. That little pause is not decoration. It's a tool. It's real as a period, except you get to place it where speech would not automatically stop. There are 2 basic ways a line can end and stopped. The line finishes a thought, and the punctuation says, take a breath. In jammed, the line breaks in the middle of a thought, and the reader has to step over the edge to find out what happens. Listen to an end-stopped pair. The cafeteria door banged shut. I held my tray with both hands. Each line is a complete step. The reader lands. Then they land again. The pace is steady. That can be the right choice when you want the moment to feel controlled, heavy, or slow, like walking carefully so you don't spill anything. Now, the same moment in jammed. The cafeteria door banged shut. I held my tray with both hands. Do you hear the difference? For a second, banged is just a sound. Then shut arrives and finishes the action. Both hangs in the air before hands tells you what you were afraid of dropping. The break makes the reader lean forward. That is not a trick for its own sake. That is the line doing real work. Here is why the break matters. An end-stop line says, this piece is complete. Look at it. An enjammed line says, you think you know. Keep going. Used on purpose, that is power. Used by accident, that is just a sentence chopped into pieces because the margin got close. Poetry is not prose cut up like lunch meat. If you break a line only because you ran out of room, the break is not a craft move. It is a typo with confidence. Try this test on any draft. Read the line out loud and stop at the break. Ask, what does a reader believe right now? Then read the next line. Did the second line change the first? If yes, you used the break. If the two lines could have been one ordinary sentence and nothing would be lost, you probably only made a staircase. You can mix both kinds in one poem. Most good poems do. All end stops can feel like a march. All end jams can feel like a person who never takes a breath. Variation gives the poem texture, the way a hallway is not one long identical tile. One more small example, because this is the place students either get it or start breaking lines at every third word for style points. I open my locker is complete. Fine. I opened makes the reader wait for the object. If the next line is my locker, you bought a tiny delay. If the next line is nothing, the lock was jammed. You bought a surprise. That surprise only works if you meant it. So the thing is the material, the line is the cut. Next, we look at what happens when you group those lines into rooms. If a line is a step, a stanza is a room. That is not me being cute. Stanza is an Italian word that literally means room. In a poem, a stanza is a group of lines set off from the next group. A little space on the page that says, this belongs together. Walk into one room and you know what kind of place it is. Walk into the next room and the job of the space can change. You don't need 20 names today. Poetry has a whole apartment building of stanza labels, and we're not touring every floor. You need 3. Couplet, 2 lines. Tercet, 3 lines. Quatrain, 4 lines. That's enough to start building. A couplet is a small room. 2 steps and you're done. It is good for a hit of action, a turn, or a last look. For example, the lock stuck. I kicked it once. 2 lines. 1 room, problem and answer. If you stuffed 6 extra lines in there about how locks have betrayed you since 6th grade, you would not have a bigger poem. You would have a crowded closet. A tercet gives you one more step, enough space to set a thing down and turn it, not enough space to wander. For example, the bus hissed at the curb. I found a seat over the wheel. My backpack sat on my shoes. 3 lines, 1 room, you can stand in it. A quatrain is a larger room. 4 lines to arrive, look around, and leave with something changed. Many poems you have already read live in quatrains because 4 lines can hold a small scene without becoming a speech. The white space between stanzas is not wasted paper. It is a hallway. The reader crosses it. Sometimes something can change on the other side. A new image, a new place, a second look at the same locker. If every stanza is the same size and the same temperature, the apartment feels like a motel. Variation is allowed. A couplet after a quatrain can feel like stepping from a classroom into a stairwell. Here's the only rule I want you to keep. Don't break a poem into stanzas because the page looked lonely. Group lines because they belong in the same room. If the next thought is a new room, give it one. If it is still the same room, stay. You already have things. you already have cuts. Now you can decide how many lines live together before the reader walks down the hall. One more beam, and this one saves people from a lot of confusion. The voice inside a poem is called the speaker, not the author automatically, not you automatically, the speaker. If a poem says, I opened my locker, that I is a voice the writer built. It might be close to the writer's real life. It might be a borrowed life. It might be a completely invented person who has never stood in this building. That is allowed. That is part of the job. This matters for two reasons. First, you're not trapped inside your own exact Tuesday. You can write a speaker who is older, younger, braver, quieter, or standing in a different hallway. Research and imagination count. If the only legal poems were courtroom transcripts of your afternoon, most of literature would have to go home. Second, when we talk about a poem in class, in a conference, on a worksheet, we say the speaker, not you admitted that you, not the poet is clearly depressed about cafeteria pizza. The speaker held the tray. The speaker kicked the lock. That language keeps us inside the poem instead of inside somebody's private business. Quick example. I never miss the bus. The speaker might be a brag, a lie, or a joke. Other example. I watched the bus leave without me. That speaker is standing in a totally different room. Same writer could have written both. The speaker is the choice. So when you draft, you may use the word I. Just remember, I is a tool. It is not a confession booth unless you want it to be. You now have four beams: things, lines, rooms, and a voice. Here's how beginners knock the building over. They fall in love with one of these tools and use it like a fire hose. All images stacked until the reader cannot see the floor. All in Jamit so nobody is allowed to breathe. All tiny couplets until the page looks like a ladder and nobody knows why. All I until the poem is a diary that happened to meet a return key. One device used on purpose can be powerful. A single repeated action, one clean end stopped landing, one object that carries the whole feeling. That's craft. One device used because it is the only hammer you grabbed gets heavy handed. The poem starts shouting. It waves its tool in the air and forgets to build the house. I have a warning for you. Too much of one ingredient makes the mixture volatile. You have tasted that in other subjects. Too much hot sauce is not more flavor, it's just heat. Poetry works the same way. You don't have to use every tool today. In fact, please don't. Practice one beam at a time. Put two good things in a couplet. Try one in jam break that actually changes the meaning. Leave a stanza break only when the thought walks into a new room. That's building. That's not a parade float with 12 gadgets bolted on because they looked fancy in the catalog. Later, we'll add metaphor, sound, repetition. They will still need the same rule. Blend. Do not dump. If you remember only one sentence from this part, make it this. A tool is for work, not for showing that you own the tool. Now you work. This is not optional. Decorating at the end. This is the point of the lecture. You are going to pause the video, sit down and write. Not think about writing. Write. If the page is still blank, you are not finished. When both exercises are done, press play and we will close. Exercise 1, things first. We're looking for 8 to 10 lines. Open your quick write list. If you skipped that list earlier, stop and make it now. 8 to 10 specific things from one ordinary moment. Circle 4 of them. Build 8 to 10 lines that use those things and almost no labels. Don't lean on sad, awkward, nervous, or left out unless the objects have already done the job. If a line is only a feeling word, cross it out. Replace it with something a reader could point at. A sound, an object, a texture, a small action. This is practice, not a contest. A rough 8 lines of things beats one polished caption. Exercise 2, cut on purpose. Our length that we're looking for here is 6 to 8 lines. Take the same moment or a tight piece of exercise 1 and write it again in 6 to 8 lines. This time the job is the cut. Include at least 2 end stop lines and at least 2 in jammed lines. After you finish, put a slash at each break and write E or S in the margin so it's clear you meant the break. Then group the lines into a couplet, a tercet, or a quatrain. 1 room is enough. 2 rooms are allowed only if the second thought actually walks down the hall. Don't chop a sentence into confetti and call it style. If the break doesn't change the breath or the meaning, try the cut again. Write in your notebook or on the worksheet, if you have it, complete sentences are not the goal. Complete attempts are. You have the materials, use them. So pause now, press play when you have both exercises on the page. Here is what I want you to keep, not 12 new terms. These, a poem is built. It has bones. Feelings can start the work. Things carry it. No ideas, but in things is not a poster slogan. It is a work order. A line is a unit of meaning, not a sentence that got tired. In stop lines, land. In jam lines, lean. The break is a choice. A stanza is a room. Group lines because they belong together, not because the page looked empty. The speaker is the voice in the poem. That voice is not automatically you. One tool used on purpose is craft. One tool used for show is a heavy hand. If your pages from today are messy, that's not failure. That's evidence you practiced. A list of objects and a few deliberate line breaks are worth more than a neat caption that says, I felt a lot. Nobody builds a house by wishing the roof into place. They stack what they have and they cut what they must. If you only finished exercise 1, that still counts. Come back to exercise 2. The cut is worth waiting for. Next time, we go one beam deeper. You have the idea that images live in things. Lecture 3 is about collecting those things on purpose, building a stock of images you can actually use, instead of waiting for a perfect feeling to arrive fully dressed. You will not need a larger life. You will need a sharper eye for the life you already have. If this still feels like a lot, start smaller than you think. 1 object, 1 honest cut, 1 small room. You don't have to sound like a famous poet by the end of the hour. You have to put materials on the page and make a few choices. Give the idea a body, then decide where the line breaks. Until next time.